I always do that. I always get all ready to stream, transition my camera, I'm ready to start going, and then boom, I've forgotten to turn the mic back on. But this time I learned. Now, things look a bit different right now, don't they? I'm not sitting at a desk that's slightly better lit. Why is that? Why am I... Oh my god, why am I in a blanket? Is this a dog? It's a stuffed dog. Who still sleeps with stuffed dogs? I do. I still sleep with a stuffed dog. It's also late. It is so late right now. Yeah, so you might be wondering, what's Bloshwath doing out here? Why is Bloshwath streaming late at night? Well, it's late at night for me, I guess. It's 1:30 here. Why am I streaming late at night with a stuffed dog on my bed with all these cozy lights and... Oh, is this? Oh, what's that? Does that say something about Harry Potter? Oh my god, Harry Potter? Is that a ticket to 9 3/4 that totally won't show up? Am I going to Hogwarts? Well, fellow viewer, don't be surprised. It's not just me going to Hogwarts. It's all of us. So, oh, hello. Why is my mic on the ceiling? Good question, Akshay. My mic is on the ceiling because I have no fucking other ledges to it. Oh, wait. I tagged this as a family-friendly stream. I can't say that. My mic is on the ceiling because I have no other ledges to attach it to. Like, it can't affix to this. If it affixes to that, it's gonna fall down. This is a bed. These are bed sheets. How do I attach it to bed sheets? Yeah, this is a Christian stream. Thank you. Hello, Adria. Thanks for joining. Yeah, so I'm all cozy. I'm gonna prep us because this is the first sleepy stream we're doing this way, and we've got some new stuff to discuss. So, first things first, the biggest change. The sleepy streams are going to be nightly. I promise. It is going to be every single night except for exceptions. And the exceptions, I don't know what the exceptions are quite yet. Merlin's Beard, that's the only one I know. Aw, damn it, you just typed it. You beat me to it. Merlin's Beard. By Dumbledore's wig. I'm sure Dumbledore doesn't wear a wig. By Harry's glasses. I don't know. We'll have to come up with some of those. I've got a lovely glass, by the way. It's got a lovely glass of tea, although since it's 1:30 in the morning here, this is non-caffeinated tea. This is a strawberry and raspberry water infusion. I hate calling it a water infusion because I sound like I should be in Oregon running like an Airbnb if I call my beverages water infusion. So we're just gonna call it tea. But it's not caffeinated. I've got myself some warm tea. I hope you guys have some cozy vibe stuff going on. As you can see, I am very cozied out. I've got my little pupper. I've had him since like 2nd grade. I had one before him who was identical. And then something happened and his back got all torn open and couldn't have him anymore, so I got a new one. I don't know where he is. God bless his little soul. Anyways, oh, and check these pajamas out. Oh, and the legs inside them. No, these are my shark pajamas. Yeah, so anyways, as I was saying, I should be wearing my Harry Potter pajamas, actually. That's perhaps the biggest crime I've committed tonight, setting up this stream. No, so anyways, we're gonna be reading Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone tonight. But the big change is, yes, streams are gonna be every night from now on at 8:30 p.m. EST. And we're going to read accents. Oh, you bet. They're gonna be really bad. But we're doing them. Yeah, we'll try is the thing. Yeah, and so, what am I saying? Yeah, every night, 8:30 p.m. EST, we'll be reading stories. We're gonna do, I think, 2 chapters of Harry Potter a night. I can't actually remember how long these are, and I obviously did not do any prep because I'm not a responsible streamer like that. So 1 or 2 chapters. Basically, it'll be about 45 to an hour of reading, I think, tops. And then twice a week on Sundays, not this Sunday, but starting from next Sunday onwards, twice a week, Sundays and Thursdays, the stream will start at 6:30 p.m. and we will play video games for 2 hours and then start the stream. Anyways, I'm just filling out the time. We got a couple more people I know are coming by, so we're just gonna wait for some peeps to tune in, enjoy our warm tea. I hope everyone's having a good weekend. It's been a long weekend for me, but today we stayed in. We ended up watching Where the Wild Things Are. I drank a lot of tea, as per usual. What's new? And yeah, it's a great movie, that one, Where the Wild Things Are. I kind of forgot how good it was, actually. But well worth it. Let's turn this down a little bit. Yeah, there we go. So anyways, while we're getting warmed up, I have, here you go. This is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Except, as you can see, whoa, this is bigger than a chapter book usually is. Well, my friend, thanks for pointing that out. I'm glad that you did. That's because this is a hardcover illustrated copy of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, and this was published in 2015, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, and it's got illustrations in it by Jim Kay. So, obviously, you've got this beautiful title card, which, if I hold it properly, you can see the silvery font, but we've also got little Harry down here, Hedwig's up here, and obviously the train at King's Cross, the Hogwarts Express. There are a couple other little details in it. So obviously, since this was published in 2015, it's after the movies have come out, so you can see the drawings have some inspiration from the movies and the characters in them and so on. But they are pretty original. And the first thing you open to, actually, is this somewhat of a reimagination of Hogwarts Castle, but it's a lot darker and sort of melancholy, very mysterious. It looks similar to the sets, but something to consider. Anyways, this book also listen to how squeaky this book is. This book is so squeaky. What's up with that? Okay. So I think we're going to start reading, and whoever comes along will come along. But anyways, sleepy stream, reading books. Let's do it. Let me just flip through this and see how long is the first chapter. First chapter is, I keep forgetting that this is, in fact, not actually a picture book. So the first chapter is The Boy Who Lived. I think, you know what? I think we'll read one chapter and then we can judge the time. And depending on what the time is, we can decide if we're going to do another chapter or not. Anyways, let me pull this up. So, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Obviously, J.K. Rowling. You know this. Oh boy, I'm going to have to take this book cover off. This is honestly, too squeaky. Oh, there we go. Yeah, actually, you know what? That's not bad, because when you take it off, it is a lovely shade of red, which I dig. This is my shade of red right here. Okay. Shall we begin? Are you guys all cozy and settled? You ready to hear some bedtime stories? I know I am maxed out cozy right now. My voice has dropped 3 octaves from normal. I've got a blanket on, got my little dog by my side. I'm literally in bed with 4 pillows behind me, and of course, I'll take one last pull of tea. A naked book, so scandalous. Yeah, God forbid. Nice long pull of this tea. There we go. You guys all cozy? Ready to get going? I think I'm ready, so we shall begin. Got a lovely little table of contents, and here we go. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived, and we have some lovely illustrations of the Dursleys, as you can see. Little Dudley looking quite pudgy. His face is covered in food in literally every single one of these photos. But of course, got Vernon and Petunia also. Anyways, Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lived. Mr. and Mrs. Dursley of number 4 Privet Drive were proud to say that they were perfectly normal. Thank you very much. They were the last people you'd expect to be involved in anything strange or mysterious, because they just didn't hold with such nonsense. Mr. Dursley was the director of a firm called Grunnings, which made drills. He was a big, beefy man with hardly any neck, although he did have a very large mustache. Mrs. Dursley was thin and blonde and had nearly twice the usual amount of neck, which came in very useful as she spent so much of her time craning over garden fences, spying on her neighbors. The Dursleys had a small son called Dudley, and, in their opinion, there was no finer boy anywhere. The Dursleys had everything they wanted, but they also had a secret, and their greatest fear was that somebody would discover it. They didn't think that they could bear it if anyone found out about the Potters. Mrs. Potter was Mrs. Dursley's sister, but they hadn't met for several years. In fact, Mrs. Dursley pretended she didn't have a sister because her sister and her good-for-nothing husband were as un-Dursleyish as it was possible to be. The Dursleys shuddered to think what the neighbors would say if the Potters arrived in the street. The Dursleys also knew that the Potters had a small son too, but they had never seen him. This boy was another good reason for keeping the Potters away. They didn't want to mix Dudley with a child like that. When Mr. and Mrs. Dursley woke on a dull, gray Tuesday, our story starts. There was nothing about the cloudy sky outside to suggest that strange and mysterious things would soon be happening all over the country. Mr. Dursley hummed as he picked out his most boring tie for work, and Mrs. Dursley gossiped away happily as she wrestled a screaming Dudley into his high chair. None of them noticed a large, tawny owl flutter past the window. At 8:30, Mr. Dursley picked up his briefcase, pecked Mrs. Dursley on the cheek, and tried to kiss Dudley goodbye, but missed, because Dudley was now having a tantrum and throwing his cereal at the walls. "Little tyke," chortled Mr. Dursley as he left the house. He got into his car and backed out of number 4's drive. It was on the corner of the street that he noticed the first sign of something peculiar. A cat, reading a map. For a second, Mr. Dursley didn't realize what he had seen. Then he jerked his head around to look again. There was a tawny tabby cat. There's the little cat. And you can see, if you look closely, reading a very heavily crumpled map. There is a tabby cat standing on the corner of Privet Drive, but there wasn't a map in sight. What could he have been thinking of? It must have been a trick of the light. Mr. Dursley blinked and stared at the cat. It stared back. As Mr. Dursley drove around the corner and up the road, he watched the cat in his mirror. It was now reading the sign that said Privet Drive. No, looking at the sign. Cats couldn't read maps or signs. Mr. Dursley gave himself a little shake and put the cat out of his mind. As he drove towards town, he thought of nothing except a large order of drills he was hoping to get on that day. But on the edge of town, drills were driven out of his mind by something else. As he sat in the usual morning traffic jam, he couldn't help noticing that there seemed to be a lot of strangely dressed people about. People in cloaks. Mr. Dursley couldn't bear people who dressed in funny clothes, the get-ups you saw in young people. He supposed this was some stupid new fashion. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, and his eyes fell on a huddle of these weirdos standing quite close by. They were whispering excitedly together. Mr. Dursley was enraged to see that a couple of them weren't young at all. Why, that man had to be older than he was, and he was wearing an emerald green cloak. The nerve of him. But then it struck Mr. Dursley that this was probably some silly stunt. These people were obviously collecting for something. Yes, that would be it. The traffic moved on, and a few minutes later, Mr. Dursley arrived in the Grunnings car park, his mind back on drills. Mr. Dursley always sat with his back to the window, in his office on the 9th floor. If he hadn't, he might have found it harder to concentrate on drills that morning. He didn't see the owls swooping past in broad daylight, though people down in the street did. They pointed and gazed, open-mouthed, were they cybergods? Open-mouthed as owl after owl sped overhead. Most of them had never even seen an owl at nighttime. Mr. Dursley, however, had a perfectly normal owl-free morning. He yelled at 5 different people, he made several important telephone calls, and shouted a bit more. He was in a very good mood until lunchtime, when he thought he'd stretch his legs and walk across the road to buy himself a bun from the baker's opposite. He'd forgotten all about the people in cloaks until he passed a group of them next to the baker's. He eyed them angrily as he passed. He didn't know why, but they made him uneasy. This lot were whispering excitedly to, and he couldn't see a single collecting tin. He was on his way back past them, clutching a large donut in a bag that he caught a few words they were saying. The Potters. That's right, that's what I heard. Yes, their son Harry. Mr. Dursley stopped dead in his tracks. Fear flooded him. He looked back at the whisperers as if he wanted to say something to them, but thought better of it. He dashed across the road and hurried up into his office, snapped at his secretary not to disturb him, seized his telephone, and had almost finished dialing his home number when he changed his mind. He put the receiver back down and stroked his mustache, thinking, no. He was being stupid. Potter wasn't such an unusual name. He was sure there were lots of people called Potter who had a son named Harry. Come to think of it, he wasn't even sure his son was named Harry. He'd never even seen the boy. It might have been Harvey or Harold. There's no point in worrying Mrs. Dursley. She always got upset at any mention of her sister. He didn't blame her, if he'd had a sister like that. But all the same, those people in cloaks. He found it a lot harder to concentrate on drills in the afternoon, and when he left the building at 5 o'clock, he was still so worried that he walked straight into someone right outside the door. Sorry, he grunted, as the tiny old man stumbled and almost fell. It was a few seconds before Mr. Dursley realized that the man was wearing a violet cloak. He didn't seem upset at all about being almost knocked to the ground. On the contrary, his face split into a wide smile, and he said in a squeaky voice, I'm sorry, it's out of habit I say sorry now. In a squeaky voice that made passerby stare. Don't be sorry, my dear sir, for nothing could upset me today. Rejoice, for you know who has gone at last. Even muggles like yourself should be celebrating this happy, happy day. And the old man hugged Mr. Dursley around the middle and walked off. Mr. Dursley stood rooted on the spot. He had been hugged by a complete stranger. He also thought that he had been called a muggle, whatever that was. He was rattled. He hurried to his car and set off home, hoping he was imagining things, which he had never hoped before, because he didn't approve of imagination. As he pulled into the driveway of number 4, the first thing he saw, and it didn't improve his mood, was the tabby cat he had spotted this morning. It was now sitting on his garden wall. He was sure it was the same one. It had the same markings around its eyes. Shoo! Mr. Dursley said loudly. The cat didn't move. It just gave him a stern look. Was this normal cat behavior? Mr. Dursley wondered. Trying to pull himself together, he let himself into the house. He was still determined not to mention a thing of this to his wife. Mrs. Dursley had had a nice, normal day. She told him over dinner all about Mrs. Next Door's problems with her daughter, and how Dudley had learnt a new word. Shan't. Mr. Dursley tried to act normally. When Dudley had been put to bed, he went into the living room in time to catch the last report on the evening news. And finally, birdwatchers everywhere have reported that the nation's owls have been behaving very unusually today. Although owls normally hunt at night and are hardly ever seen in daylight, there have been hundreds of sightings of these birds flying in every direction since sunrise. Experts are unable to explain why the owls have suddenly changed their sleeping patterns. The newsreader allowed himself a grin. Most mysterious. And now, over to Jim McGuffin for the weather. Going to be any more showers of owls this evening tonight, Jim? Well, Ted, said the weatherman, I don't know about that, but it's not only the owls that have been acting oddly today. Viewers as far apart as Kent, Yorkshire, and Dundee have been phoning in to tell me that instead of the rain I promised yesterday, they've had a downpour of shooting stars. Perhaps people have been celebrating bonfire night early. It's not until next week, folks, but I can promise a wet night tonight. Mr. Dursley sat frozen in his armchair. Shooting stars all over Britain, owls flying by daylight, mysterious people in cloaks all over the place, and a whisper. A whisper about the Potters. Mrs. Dursley came into the living room carrying 2 cups of tea. It was no good. He'd have to say something to her. He cleared his throat nervously. Petunia, dear, you haven't heard from your sister lately, have you? As he expected, Mrs. Dursley looked shocked and angry. After all, they normally pretended she didn't have a sister. Okay, time to do the female British accent, which is not going to happen. No, she said. I don't know why. I always go high and floaty for my female voices, which is not at all Petunia. No, she said sharply. Why? Funny stuff on the news, Mr. Dursley mumbled. Owls, shooting stars, and there are a lot of funny-looking people in the town today. So, snapped Mrs. Dursley. Well, I just thought maybe it was something to do with, her lot. Mrs. Dursley sipped her tea through her pursed lips. Mr. Dursley wondered whether he'd dare tell her he'd heard the name Potter. He decided he didn't dare. Instead, he said as casually as he could, their son. He'd be about Dudley's age now, wouldn't he? I suppose so, Mrs. Dursley said stiffly. What's his name again? Howard, isn't it? Harry. Nasty common name, if you ask me. Oh, yes, said Mr. Dursley, his heart sinking horribly. Yes, I would quite agree. He didn't say another word on the subject as they went upstairs to bed. While Mrs. Dursley was in the bathroom, Mr. Dursley crept into the bedroom window and peered down into the front garden. The cat was still there. It was staring down Privet Drive as though waiting for something. Was he imagining things? Could this have anything to do at all with the Potters? If it did, if it got out that they were related to a pair of... Well, he didn't think he could bear it. The Dursleys got into bed. Mrs. Dursley fell asleep quickly, but Mr. Dursley lay awake, turning it all over in his mind. His last comforting thought before he fell asleep was that even if the Potters were involved, there was no reason for them to come near him and Mrs. Dursley. The Potters knew very well what he and Petunia thought about them and their kind. He couldn't see how him and Petunia could get mixed up in anything that might be going on. He yawned and turned over. It couldn't affect them. How very wrong he was. Mr. Dursley might have been drifting into an uneasy sleep, but the cat on the wall outside was showing no signs of sleepiness. It was sitting as still as a statue, its eyes fixed unblinkingly on the corner of Privet Drive. It didn't seem to so much as quiver when a car door slammed in the next street, nor when 2 owls swooped in overhead. In fact, it was nearly midnight before the cat moved at all. A man appeared on the corner the cat had been watching, appeared so suddenly and silently that you thought he'd have just popped out of the ground. The cat's tail twitched and its eyes narrowed. Nothing like this man had ever been seen on Privet Drive. He was tall, thin, and very old, judging by the silver of his hair and his beard, which were both long enough to tuck into his belt. He was wearing long robes, a purple cloak which was swept to the ground, and high-heeled buckled boots. His blue eyes were light, bright, and sparkling behind half-moon spectacles, and his nose was very long and crooked, as though it had been broken at least twice. This man's name was Albus Dumbledore. Albus Dumbledore didn't seem to realize he had just arrived in a street where everything from his name to his boots were unwelcome. He was busy rummaging for something in his cloak, looking for something. But he did seem to realize that he was being watched, because he looked up suddenly at the cat, which was still staring at him from the other end of the street. For some reason, the sight of the cat seemed to amuse him. He chuckled and muttered, "I should have known." He had found what he was looking for inside his pocket. It seemed to be a silver cigarette lighter. He flicked it open, held it up in the air, and clicked it. The nearest street lamp went out with a little pop. He clicked it again. The next lamp flickered into darkness. 12 times he clicked the put-outer, until the only lights left in the whole street were two tiny pinpricks in the distance, which were the eyes of the cat watching him. If anyone looked out of their window now, even the beady-eyed Mrs. Dursley, they wouldn't happen to be able to see anything that was happening down on the pavement. Dumbledore slipped the put-outer back inside his cloak and set off down the street towards number 4, where he sat down on the wall next to the cat. He didn't look at it, but after a moment, he spoke to it. "Fancy seeing you here, Professor McGonagall." He turned to smile at the tabby, but it had gone. Instead, he was smiling at a rather severe-looking woman who was wearing square glasses exactly the shape of the marking the cat had around its eyes. She, too, was wearing a cloak, an emerald one. Her black hair was drawn into a tight bun. She looked distinctly ruffled. "How did you know it was me?" she asked. "My dear Professor, I've never seen a cat sit so stiffly." "You'd be stiff if you'd been sitting on a brick wall all day," said Professor McGonagall. "All day? When you could have been celebrating. I must have passed a dozen feasts and parties on my way over here." Professor McGonagall sniffed angrily. "Oh yes, everybody's celebrating, all right," she said impatiently. "You'd think they might even be a bit more careful, but no. Even the Muggles have noticed something's going on. It was on their news." She jerked her head back at the Dursleys' dark living room window. "I heard it. Flocks of owls, shooting stars. Well, they're not completely stupid. They were bound to notice something. Shooting stars down in Kent? I bet that was Daedalus Diggle. He never had much sense." "You can't blame them," said Dumbledore gently. "We've had precious little to celebrate for 11 years. "I know that," said Professor McGonagall irritably. "But there's no reason to lose our heads. People are being downright careless, out on the streets in broad daylight, not even dressed in Muggle clothes, swapping rumors." She threw a sharp sideways glance at Dumbledore here, as though hoping he was going to tell her something, but he didn't, so she went on. "A fine thing it would be if, on the day you-know-who it seems to have disappeared, the Muggles found out all about us. I suppose he really has gone, Dumbledore?" "It certainly seems so," said Dumbledore. "We have much to be thankful for." "Would you care for a sherbet lemon?" "A what?" "A sherbet lemon. They're a kind of Muggle sweet I'm rather fond of." "No, thank you," said Professor McGonagall coldly, as though she didn't think now was the moment for sherbet lemons. "As I say, even if you know who has gone—" "My dear Professor, surely a sensible person like yourself can call him by his name. All this you-know-who nonsense, for 11 years, have been trying to persuade people to call him by his proper name. Voldemort." Professor McGonagall flinched, but Dumbledore, who was unsticking 2 sherbet lemons, seemed not to notice. "It all gets so confusing if we keep saying you-know-who. I've never seen any reason to be frightened of saying Voldemort's name." "I know you haven't," said Professor McGonagall, sounding half exasperated, half admiring. "But you're different. Everybody knows you're the only one you know—" "Oh, all right. Voldemort was frightened of." "You flatter me," said Dumbledore calmly. "Voldemort had powers I will never have." "Only because you're too, noble to use them." "It's lucky it's dark. I haven't blushed so much since Madame Pomfrey told me she liked my new earmuffs." Professor McGonagall shot a sharp look at Dumbledore and said, "The owls are nothing to the rumors that are flying around. You know what everyone's saying? About why he's disappeared? About what finally stopped him? It seemed Professor McGonagall had reached the point she was most anxious to discuss. The real reason she had been waiting on a cold, hard wall all day. For neither cat nor woman had she fixed Dumbledore with such a piercing stare as she did now. It was plain that whatever everyone was saying, she was not going to believe it until Dumbledore had told it to her that it was true. Dumbledore, however, was choosing another sherbet lemon and did not answer. What they're saying, she pressed on, is that last night Voldemort turned up in Godric's Hollow, Jesus. He went to find the Potters. The rumor is that Lily and James Potter that they're dead. Dumbledore bowed his head. Professor McGonagall gasped. Lily and James, I can't believe it. I don't want to believe it. Oh, Albus. Dumbledore reached out and patted her on the shoulder. I know, he said heavily. Professor McGonagall's voice trembled as she went on. That's not all. They're saying that he tried to kill the Potter's son, Harry. But he couldn't. He couldn't kill that little boy. No one knows why or how, but they're saying that he couldn't kill Harry Potter. Voldemort's power somehow broke, and that's why he's gone. Dumbledore nodded glumly. It's true, faltered Professor McGonagall. After all he's done, after all the people he's killed, he couldn't kill a little boy. It's just a sounding of all things to stop him. But how in the name of heaven did Harry survive? We can only guess, said Dumbledore. We may never know. Professor McGonagall pulled out a lace handkerchief and dabbed at her eyes beneath her spectacles. Dumbledore gave a great sniff as he took a golden watch from his pocket and examined it. It was a very odd watch. It had 12 hands, but no numbers. Instead, little planets were moving around the edge. It must have made sense to Dumbledore, though, because he put it back in his pocket and said, Hagrid's late. I suppose it was he who told you I'd be here, by the way. Yes, said Professor McGonagall, and I don't suppose you're going to tell me why you're here, of all places? I've come to bring Harry to his aunt and uncle. They're the only family he has left. You can't mean the people who live here, cried Professor McGonagall, jumping to her feet, pointing at number 4. Dumbledore, you can't. I've been watching them all day. You couldn't find 2 people who are less like us. And they've got the son. I saw him kicking his mother all the way up the street, screaming for sweets. Harry Potter, come and live here. It's the best place for him, said Dumbledore firmly. His aunt and uncle will be able to explain everything to him when he's older. I've written them a letter. A letter? Repeated Professor McGonagall faintly, sitting back down on the wall. Really, Dumbledore? You think you can explain this all in a letter? These people will never understand him. He'll be famous, a legend. I wouldn't be surprised if today was known as Harry Potter Day in the future. There will be books written about Harry. Every child in our world will know his name. Exactly, said Dumbledore, looking very seriously over the top of his half-moon glasses. It would be enough to turn any boy's head. Famous before he can even walk and talk. Famous for something he won't even remember. Can't you see how much better off he'll be? Growing up away from all of that until he's ready to take it. Professor McGonagall opened her mouth, changed her mind, swallowed, and then said, Yes, you're right, of course. But how is the boy getting here, Dumbledore? She eyed his cloak suddenly, as though she thought he might be hiding Harry under it. Hagrid's bringing him. You think it's wise to trust Hagrid with something as important as this? I would trust Hagrid with my life, said Dumbledore. I'm not saying his heart isn't in the right place, said Professor McGonagall grudgingly, but you can't pretend that he's not careless. He does tend to... What was that? A low rumbling sound had broken the silence around them. It grew steadily louder as they looked up and down the street for some sign of headlight. It swelled to a roar as they both looked up to the sky, and a huge motorbike fell out of the air and landed in the road in front of them. If the motorbike was huge, it was nothing compared to the man sitting astride it. And here, let me switch that. we have... Oh, lost the page. A photo of the man on the bike. Ooh, he looks quite an intimidating sight, doesn't he, with that bright headlight. Giant, great bushy beard. He was almost twice as tall as a normal man, and at least 5 times as wide. He looked simply too big to be allowed, and so wild. Long tangles of bushy black hair and beard hid most of his face. He had hands the size of dustbin lids, and his feet in their leather boots were like baby dolphins. In his vast, muscular arms, he was holding a bundle of blankets. "Hagrid," said Dumbledore, sounding relieved. "At last. And where did you get that motorbike?" "Borrowed it, Professor Dumbledore, sir," said the giant, climbing off carefully the motorbike as he spoke. "Young Sirius Black lent it to me. I've got him, sir." "No problems, were there?" "No, sir. House was almost destroyed, but I got him out right before the Muggles started swarming around. He fell asleep as we were flying over Bristol." Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall bent forward over the bundle of blankets. Inside, just visible, was a baby boy, fast asleep. Under a tuft of jet-black hair over his forehead, they could see a curiously shaped cut, like a bolt of lightning. "Is that where?" whispered Professor McGonagall. "Yes," said Dumbledore. "You'll have that scar forever." "Couldn't you do something about it, Dumbledore?" "Even if I could, I wouldn't. Scars can come in useful. I have one myself above my left knee, which is a perfect map of the London Underground." "Well, give him here, Hagrid. We'd better get this over with." Dumbledore took Harry in his arms and turned towards the Dursleys' house. And here, also, we have a lovely illustration of Hagrid's motorbike flying over Privet Drive and the city and town below. Could I say goodbye to him, sir?" asked Hagrid. He bent his great shaggy head over Harry and gave him what must have been a very scratchy, whiskery kiss. Then suddenly, Hagrid let out a howl like a wounded dog. "Shh!" hissed Professor McGonagall. "You'll wake up the Muggles." "Sorry," sobbed Hagrid, taking out a large spotted handkerchief and burying his face in it. "But I can't stand it. Lily and James dead, and poor little Harry off to live with Muggles." Yes, it's very sad, but get a grip on yourself, Hagrid, or we'll be found," Professor McGonagall whispered, patting Hagrid gingerly on his arm as Dumbledore stepped over the low garden wall and walked to the front door. He laid Harry gently on the doorstep, took out a letter from his cloak and tucked it inside Harry's blankets, and then came back to the other two. For a full minute, the 3 of them stood and looked at the little bundle. Hagrid's shoulders shook. Professor McGonagall blinked furiously, and the twinkling light that usually shone from Dumbledore's eyes seemed to have gone out. "Well," said Dumbledore finally, "that's that. We've got no business staying here. We may as well go and join the celebrations." "Yeah," said Hagrid in a muffled voice. "I'd best get this bike away. Good night, Professor McGonagall. Professor Dumbledore, sir." Wiping his streaming eyes on his jacket sleeve, Hagrid swung himself onto the motorbike and kicked the engine into life. With a roar, it rose into the air and off into the night. "I shall see you soon, I expect, Professor McGonagall," said Dumbledore, nodding to her. Professor McGonagall blew her nose in reply. Dumbledore turned and walked back down the street. On the corner, he stopped and took out the silver put-outer. He clicked it once, and 12 balls of light sped back into the street lamps, so that Privet Drive suddenly glowed orange. He could make out a tabby cat slinking around the corner at the other end of the street. He could just see the bundle of blankets that lay on the steps of number 4. "Good luck, Harry," he murmured. He turned on his heel, and with a swish of his cloak, he was gone. A breeze ruffled the neat hedges of Privet Drive, which lay silent and tidy under the inky sky. The very last place you'd expect astonishing things to happen. Harry Potter rolled over inside his blankets without waking up. One small hand closed on the letter beside him, and he slept on, not knowing he was special, not knowing he was famous, not knowing he would be woken in a few hours' time by Mrs. Dursley's scream as she opened the front door to put out the milk bottles, nor that he would spend the next few weeks being prodded and pinched by his cousin Dursley, Dudley even. He couldn't know that at this very moment, people meeting in secret all over the country were holding up their glasses and saying in hushed tones, "To Harry Potter, the boy who lived." And so, we've got our setup now. Harry Potter, the boy who lived. Very curious, very compelling start. Interesting characters of Dumbledore, very stoic man, and McGonagall, seemingly quite harried at the moment. Cue Hedwig's theme. Oh wait, hold up. I can't actually do that. We have the technology. Hold up. We're gonna make this work. It's gonna happen. Bear with me, folks. Bear with me. Oop. This is gonna be super loud. There we go. I actually can't hear this because I've got the stream running. Do 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 do. I'm assuming. Let me just see where it is real fast. I wasn't that far off, was I? Oh boy. Anyways, yeah, I think that's a very exciting start, isn't it? I haven't actually reread the Harry Potter books in quite some time, so it's lovely to have a little excuse to do that, you know? I hope you guys can actually hear this. I think it's probably a bit too quiet. Let me turn that up a little bit. There we go. Just a touch, just a hair, a sliver. Well, thank you so much to everyone who joined for stream tonight. It was very much a pleasure. As I said earlier, we will be streaming nightly, 8:30 p.m. EST, and we're going to be doing, it looks like, the way these are reading, a chapter of Harry Potter a night until we get through this. And then we've got some other books. Now, in terms of, I know this is looking very far forward into the future, but in terms of other books we might pursue, I'm thinking next on the list is going to be My Father's Dragon. I think in general, we're going to tend to gravitate towards children's books. Not like super early chapter books, but we'll probably gravitate towards children's books. But as we go, obviously, I will take recommendations from you guys on what you want to hear read aloud. Now, let me take one more pull from my tea. Thank you so much for joining us for the sleepy stream through all the silly voices and the very chimerical tale we're about to embark on. I'll see all of you guys tomorrow evening, if you can make it. And if not, the evening after or the one after that, who knows? I'll be here reading Harry Potter. Anyways, you know the drill. Stay cozy out there, folks.